In segment 1, we discussed that food provides the raw materials for growth and the fuel to make it happen. We also discussed how nutrients are grouped into 6 categories. Now let's discuss how we take or extract energy and nutrients from the food that we eat. The human digestive system is like an assembly line running backwards. Imagine starting with an assembled car and dismantling it or stripping it into its many parts: the tires, doors, windshield, steering wheel. The food entering the digestive system is like the intact car. It enters the assembly line and then passes through 4 distinct phases, during which the food is progressively chewed up and broken down, the nutrients absorbed by the body, and the non-usable portion of the raw materials discarded as waste products. The 4 phases are ingestion, digestion, absorption, and elimination. And in the next several sections we'll examine these 4 stages in more detail. Typically lasting less than a minute, ingestion primarily involves 4 parts of your anatomy: your mouth, teeth, tongue, and esophagus. That is, the tube running from your mouth to your stomach. The salivary glands secrete mucus that lubricates the food to help it pass into your stomach. They also secrete an enzyme called alpha amylase that initiates the process of digestion. Alpha amylase breaks down the bonds holding together the starch molecule. About 20% of the ingested starch is broken down in the mouth. Protein and fat molecules, on the other hand, are not broken down at all. You start chewing your food in your mouth in order to tear and grind it into little bits. Several different types of teeth have evolved in mammals and other animal species that allow different types of food items to be processed. Incisor and canine teeth in the front are used for biting and tearing food, and behind them are premolars and molars, which are used for grinding and crushing food. While you're chewing your food, your tongue assists in the process by forming the food into a ball shape that can be swallowed. The ball of partly crushed saliva-coated food is pushed to the back of your mouth by your tongue, and there your throat opens to 2 passageways into your torso: the trachea and the esophagus. The trachea is also called the windpipe, and it connects to your lungs, while the esophagus connects to your stomach. Food destined for your stomach is kept from entering your trachea by a fast but critical maneuver in which your voice box moves up due to muscle contractions, causing a flap of tissue called the epiglottis to be pushed over the entrance to the trachea just as you begin to swallow. Waves of smooth muscle contractions, called peristalsis, propel the food down the esophagus and into the stomach, where digestion continues. Food is fuel, but it's useless to an animal until it's been completely broken down into its fundamental chemical constituents. Only then can it be absorbed into the bloodstream and used constructively. The process of dismantling the large pieces of food, physically and chemically breaking them down into absorbable molecules, is digestion. It occurs primarily in the stomach and the small intestines. The esophagus empties into the stomach. An organ with thick elastic walls and a ring of muscle called a sphincter seals off the stomach once the food enters. The stomach itself has 3 functions. It physically breaks down and mixes food through the churning of the muscles surrounding the stomach. Secondly, it secretes acid to further break down food chemically and also to kill bacteria. And third, it begins some chemical digestion of proteins. Cells in the crevices within the stomach lining, called gastric pits, produce hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen, a beginner molecule quickly converted to the protein dismantling enzyme pepsin. The food becomes a creamy, very acidic liquid called chyme. Digestion only begins in the mouth and stomach. Most chemical digestion actually occurs in the small intestines, a long thin tube connected to the stomach. It's about 20 feet long and winds all around your abdominal cavity. The small intestine begins its job of chemical digestion once the sphincter muscle at the end of the stomach relaxes, creating an opening through which small amounts of chyme are squirted. The macromolecules of chyme are gradually digested with the help of the pancreas and the liver. The pancreas is nestled at the point where the stomach connects to the small intestines, and it plays a central role in digestion by secreting pancreatic juice through a duct into the very beginning portion of the small intestines. The juice is a mixture of chemicals that neutralize the acidic chyme and also enzymes that break down and digest carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Another organ that assists in the small intestine with digestion is the liver. It produces bile, a juice that aids in the breakdown of fats. The liver sends the bile to the gallbladder, and from there it passes through a small duct into the small intestines, where the bile initiates the first step in fat digestion. Digestion is completed in the small intestines when the consumed carbohydrates, proteins, and fats have been broken down into their component parts, simple sugars, amino acids, and fatty acids, and these simple molecules can then be absorbed into the bloodstream, which is stage 3 in the process known cleverly as absorption. The structure of the small intestines is specialized to increase the surface area available for absorption. In order to be absorbed, a molecule must be in direct contact with the surface of the intestinal cell. Therefore, the more cells, the more molecules that can be taken into the body. The surface area is increased in 4 ways. First of all, the small intestines is about 20 feet long. But rather than being a smooth tube, the inner surface has internal folds that essentially make the food travel across many mountain ridges instead of traveling along a flat road. Third, the folds are fuzzy. They have finger-like projections that are called villi, which are like hills on the mountains. And then finally, the cells themselves have microvilli, giving their inner membrane a brush border and expanding the size of the cell membrane, kind of like trees on the hills on the mountains. The molecules that can be absorbed by the small intestine include simple sugars, short proteins, individual amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, and of course water. Once the food has been digested into this form, the molecules gravitate toward the intestinal surface where they contact the cells on the villi. The nutrients will be drawn into the cells and then expelled out the other side and into the bloodstream, or in the case of lipids, into the lymphatic vessels. These vessels will carry the nutrients to the liver for processing before they will be distributed to the entire body. Next, the final stage is called elimination. The material that can't be digested passes through the small intestines and enters the large intestine, or the colon. This tubular organ is shorter than the small intestines, but it's a good bit larger in diameter. Its major functions are the reabsorption of water, as well as the absorption of some salts and vitamins. Some of the vitamins absorbed by the large intestines are actually produced by the bacteria that reside in the colon. Thus, their presence is a necessity. When we take antibiotics, the bacterial colonies in our colon can be disrupted, in turn limiting absorption of key vitamins. So, as we mentioned previously, it might be necessary for individuals taking antibiotics to take supplemental vitamins. Now, get this. When taking antibiotics, about half of the fecal mass that's eliminated is actually dead bacterial cells. The consistency of the fecal matter is highly dependent upon the rate at which it passes through the large intestines. This operates on the Goldilocks principle. Pass through too fast, and the feces will be watery. Pass through too slow, and the feces will be overly solid. Pass through at the right pace, and the feces will be just right and have a good consistency. This is why fiber helps prevent constipation. As we know, fiber is indigestible cellulose, which will increase the mass of fecal matter and speed up the rate of passage through the large intestines. Even though we can't break down fiber, for animals whose diets consist primarily of plants, a major component of the diet is fiber or cellulose. But most animals don't produce enzymes that can break apart the bonds in cellulose, so what do these animals do? Well, ruminant animals such as cows, bison, deer, goats, and sheep have evolved a complex 4-part stomach that allows them to digest plant matter with the aid of bacteria. After chewing the grass, this bison swallows the plant material and passes it to the first stomach. This section is filled with cellulose digesting bacteria that break apart the macromolecule. The partially digested material is then regurgitated and rechewed, which is called the chewing of the cud, to further break apart the cell walls. Then it's swallowed again and acted upon again by the cellulose digesting bacteria. After the bacteria have done their work, the food then passes through the remaining chambers where some additional digestion occurs. A different strategy is adopted by animals such as horses, rabbits, rodents, and koalas. Instead of housing the bacteria in a stomach chamber, these animals house them in an outcropping of the small intestines called the cecum. After passing through the stomach, the chyme is diverted into the cecum where the cellulose digesting bacteria break apart the cell walls. In animals such as coyotes, cats, and humans that don't break down cellulose, the cecum has shrunk and remains as the appendix, which now has no digestive function.